Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody. What do we have today, Emily?
We do indeed have an amazing show. Journalist Zed Jelani will join us today. He's going to discuss Paul Ryan's comments on the culture war, and Jasail Noor will share his reporting on worker co-ops. Team Rising also joins us. Democratic strategist Roger Fisk and Real Clear Politics reporter Philip Wegman will be here.
And we also wanted to talk a little bit about this show, and in particular, the hosts who made this show what it is. The source of this show's success is the trust it has built with its audience. That's a credit to what Crystal and Sagar built, and we intend to stay open and honest with you. In that spirit, let's be upfront about a few things. To be completely clear, Crystal and Sagar were by no means fired or pushed out of the Hill. They would have been more than welcome to stay, and I know this from talking to them throughout the decision-making. They felt like going independent was a better opportunity, and frankly, I think they were right about that. They've built a loyal audience, and that audience will and should follow them wherever they go. Their new show, which they announced this morning, is called Breaking Points, and it starts next week, and both Emily and I encourage you to watch it.
Oh, absolutely. Sagar is a close friend of mine, and I know their new show is going to be great. I wouldn't have anything to do with Rising if things had ended badly with them or if they were pushed out. We're not here to copy them or try and replicate the absolutely singular dynamic they developed. We want you to watch Breaking Points. We can't wait to watch it ourselves. In their goodbye message last week, Crystal said this show was about, quote, challenging power and, frankly, being honest. We can think of nothing more important. There's enough corporate grift and government corruption to fill up hours and hours of television a day. The more people tackling it without fear or favor, the better. Here on Rising, that is what you'll get every single day. This show is a responsibility. It was built fearlessly and brilliantly by two incredible people and their incredible team. And it grew thanks to you, the viewers, who trust it, just like both of us do. The city is teeming with grift. There are so few platforms on which those of us who just want accurate information that hasn't been slanted by power can rely. To us, Rising is not a career opportunity or a line on a resume. It's a responsibility to use something special our friends built for the good of this wonderful country, and it's a journalistic responsibility to the public. We'll have fun. Few things are more satisfying than exposing sanctimonious corporatists for the pathetic mediocrities they are. But above all, we'll challenge power, and we'll tell the truth.
Yeah, and what made the show different was its hosts, one on the left and one on the right, but both hostile to their party establishments and both hostile to corporate power. They didn't agree on everything. And Sagar, if you ask me, is wildly wrong when it comes to immigration, and his take on weed is just insane. And it doesn't mean they're aligned on a political agenda necessarily. This is a news show, not a political movement, though it does reflect the rising power of populism. The bottom line is this. Don't stop watching Crystal and Sagar. They both have great podcasts you should subscribe to, and their show will be excellent. Ultimately, by creating a new show, they're adding and not subtracting. Rising's loss is the populist ecosystem's gain.
I could not agree more with that. And on that note, let's kick off today's show with the rising fury over the COVID lab leak theory, which the media is only now starting to give some credence after downplaying it as a conspiracy theory for more than a year. Now, the New York Times has an article, this is by Ross Douthat in the opinion section. He says, why the lab leak theory matters. That was his headline. And the argument is interesting because it's sort of on 2 points. He's commenting on the, mounting willingness in the corporate media and the legacy media to talk about the lab leak theory that was downplayed for the better part of a year. But Douthat also says something important. He says this story doesn't just matter because the media botched it epically. He says the story matters also because of the merits. There's actually some legitimate reasons why we should be very, very serious about the possibility this virus that has, absolutely destroyed the world for a year may have escaped from a laboratory.
Right, and normally when the media is telling you that something has been debunked and you can't talk about X, Y, or Z, I can pretty quickly figure out why. What's the motivation behind this debunking here? With this lab leak theory, it took me a while to even get my head around why it was acceptable and appropriate to say that there was this wet market that and some bat soup led to this pandemic. Like, that's an okay and proper thing to say in polite conversation. But it was improper to say that this Chinese lab that had some American government funding may have screwed up and allowed it to leak out. So and eventually I was like, oh, maybe it's okay, I see now, the American funding. Mm-hmm. Like, that's why we're supposed to stay away from this, because we're not told we can't criticize China. Like, if China screwed up and is being secretive, that's the first thing that the American media is going to go after. But I also think that people are going to get whiplash about how quickly this is moving from follow the science, this is 100% a wet market thing and definitely not a lab leak, to now we're veering into almost a consensus that maybe it was a lab leak. But to Ross's point, let's talk about the underlying merits. Mm-hmm. What does it mean if it was a lab leak?
Well, yeah, and so we have this comment that Scott Gottlieb made on a Sunday show. I think he was on Face the Nation this week, in which I think complements the point that Ross Douthat was making perfectly, and we can run that now.
I think if we assess that there's a probability or a possibility that this came out of a lab, it's going to affect how we respond to this. We're going to need to focus on trying to get better controls on this sort of high-risk research going forward and get better controls over these BSL-4, these high-security labs that conduct this research. Incidentally, China was not conducting this research in a BSL-4 lab.
Okay, so there you have it. We need to take the security and we need to have better controls over gain-of-function research, which is actually happening pretty frequently, to Gottlieb's point. And that's why this does matter. And that's why when you have this entire conversation for a year that was totally swept under the rug and nobody was allowed to talk about it, it's affected right now our ability to prevent this in the future, because we spent a year cowering because people were basically saying, the people in the government were turning everybody's attention away from this, which of course, and then you have their sort of useful sheep in the media, the useful idiots of the legacy media just going along with it in the name of political correctness and, burnishing their own images as sensitive and decent human beings, enlightened with a capital E human beings. And now we're here, it's June of 2021, and just finally we're starting to say, you have Scott Gottlieb saying, yeah, maybe we need better controls over all of this.
But it gets at an even bigger question, which is like, can you control this? Right. Because this is the type of thing where you need a 100% success rate. And he's talking about BSL-4 controls, that means you're wearing the hood, you're wearing the whole spacesuit. And as he said, a lot of this research was not done in BSL-4. Researchers don't want to wear spacesuits. They don't want to wear the gloves. They don't want to wear these full masks. And so what they do is they fudge where in the process their research is so that they can then follow lower protocols. That's all over the world, that you're going to have researchers who are pushing against the idea. They're like, I'm safe. I don't, I'll be okay with just a hood and some gloves. I don't need this whole rigmarole. And so you wind up at BSL-2 for a lot of this research, which is basically dentist office level protection, which is, okay, that's good if you're in the dentist office, but not necessarily if you need a 100% record to prevent a pandemic. And so the bigger question is this research even worth it? And that's what these scientists, that's the conversation these scientists don't want to have, because they have to argue that there's so much social benefit that it's worth the risk of a pandemic to continue this research. Well,
and on top of that, the implications for our relationship with China on the business side and on the government side are very, very uncomfortable for the Biden administration, and they were uncomfortable for the Trump administration, and they're uncomfortable for the business community, because it creates more and more pressure on us to be tougher on China, to decouple parts of our economy from China, if this is in fact something we can get closer and closer to the truth on, which, by the way, we're going to have a really hard time doing because the CCP is very secretive, and we still don't know nearly as much as we should about all of this, and we could have been spending the last year applying pressure to this if there was more momentum, I think, in the media and elsewhere. And again, we have a wasted year on all of these points, and that's because I think we were getting these signals from the government that, this look away, and everyone else followed along with it. And here we find out there may have been government funding, United States government funding, and this year that could have been really tough on China. which, in some ways it was, but probably not as tough as it should have been. Here we are, June 2021, and we're just starting to talk about it now. I think that speaks to how strongly people in power did not want us to know what happened.
Right, and these public health officials continue to discredit themselves at the risk of making it so that people aren't going to listen to public health officials next time when they need to. The CDC director, and let's put this up, warned recently that because of all of these people who are outside unmasked, that pretty soon there was going to be impending doom. That now here we can check whether or not there was impending doom. Turns out no. The numbers are continuing to go down. From the very beginning, there were indications that being outside was helpful to reducing transmission. That something about the indoor space was facilitating this transmission. Being outside helped. Public health officials, I understand, there was a lot they didn't know at the time, but there's so much more that we know about that now. For them still to be suggesting that all of these people gathered together outside is going to lead to doom, when they know that's probably not true. And then it gets undermined when several weeks later, the cases are actually continuing to fall.
Right. I mean, I wrote a story last March, and I think the headline was something like, this is a pandemic in an age of declining institutional trust. And at the time, I didn't fully understand the implications of that, but I knew that we were heading into something really dangerous. And we still don't understand exactly how bad this is, because the guidance on masks, the guidance on the lab, all of this, or the sort of official narrative on both of these things, the changes that the government has made, whether or not they knew or they didn't, whatever they were doing here, I don't think we fully grasp exactly how dangerous this is, not just for public trust. Like, there are going to be very legitimate consequences of the decline in public trust, very tangible consequences of it. Imagine, God forbid, we're hit with another pandemic, a year or two from now, or even 5 years down the road. Who's going to trust anybody? Who's going to do what actually needs to be done when the government tells us it needs to be done? They're not going to trust anything that comes out of the government. And I think to some extent that would be reasonable, because we were lied to so many times. And I do mean lied. I mean, they were saying things that they knew to be different from reality. And so I don't think it would be unreasonable for people to question that. And in that situation, I shudder to think of what could happen. Right.
People want to follow common sense guidance that they trust. Like that's what they want. And if you abuse that responsibility, you undermine the entire project. So we'll tell you what's on our radars next on Rising.